with Brad Bannon.
Welcome to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. I'm Brad Bannon. I'm a national Democratic strategist, a columnist for The Hill in Washington, D.C., and a political analyst for news radio station KNX in Los Angeles. You can read all my columns in The Hill at thehill.com/person/Brad-Bannon. My company, Bannon Communications Research, polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. Mondays on Deadline DC, I talk to the people and players behind the politics and policies that drive our great nation forward. Today on Deadline DC, in the first segment, Hope Frye, the co-founder of Project Lifeline, joins us to debunk replacement theory and also discuss the urgent need for immigration reform. Then Bob Keefe, the executive director of Environmental Entrepreneurs, talks about his new book, Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Planet. Before we get to our first guest, we have a clip to play from radical G.O.P. U.S. Senate candidate in Ohio, J.D. Vance, talking about replacement theory.
Are you a racist? Do you hate Mexicans? The media calls us racist for wanting to build Trump's wall. They censor us, but it doesn't change the truth. Joe Biden's open border is killing Ohioans, with more illegal drugs and more Democrat voters pouring into this country. This issue is personal. I nearly lost my mother to the poison coming across our border. No child should grow up an orphan. I'm J.D. Vance, and I approve this message because whatever they call us, we will put America first.
That was J.D. Vance, the U.S. Senate candidate for the Republicans from Ohio, mouthing off and broadcasting his racism, which I suppose probably appeals to GOP primary voters in Ohio, but hopefully very few other people. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Frye, the co-founder of Project Lifeline. She is an internationally recognized immigration lawyer focused on disadvantaged populations, especially women and children. The website for Project Lifeline is projectlifeline.com, and the Twitter handle is ProJLifeline. That's PROJLIFELINE. Hope, welcome back to Deadline DC.
Thanks, Brad. It's always a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, first of all, Hope, this is a very distressing conversation, I'm sure, for both of us and many of our viewers and listeners. Right now, the replacement theory is being used as an attack by Trump elements of the Republican Party to undermine Joe Biden's immigration policies. It's used to fuel racism, and the shooter in Buffalo who cowardly killed 10 people was a fan of replacement theory and apparently used it to justify his murder of 12 Black people in Buffalo. Why don't you explain to our viewers and listeners what replacement theory is and why it's so heinous?
Let me begin by saying that I grew up in Indiana and then began my career for 25 years in Ohio. So what J.D. Vance had to say, I've been hearing my whole life. It's nothing new. It used to be focused solely on Blacks and Jews, maybe Catholics. It's a school of thought that says that the others, non-white, generally non-Christian, are coming to take from us what is rightfully ours and just take it from us without compensation. What I think the nuance is, in 2012, there was a book written in France where the term replacement theory was coined. And I think the difference between that and the racism that I grew up with is that now it's focused really on political conspiracy theories. And you heard Vance say it, the Mexicans and others are coming into the United States so they can vote for the liberals who will take away from you what's yours. And I think the focus, it's still going on for Blacks and Jews. We saw in the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting, we saw in El Paso and in Las Vegas with the murders of Mexicans, Hispanic and Jews, Hispanic in El Paso and Las Vegas. I think another difference between when I grew up and now is the availability of automatic weapons, the easy availability, and the feeling that these murderers have that they have to take action against this conspiracy theory. And the way to do it somehow is to kill people.
Yeah, it's very sad, and I find so many things troubling about it. I don't know where to start. I think one of the most troubling things is that Republican candidates for Congress, and I guess probably for state office too, are talking about replacement theory openly and using it as justification for their racist policies. I have this theory. And if you look at the census that was conducted in 2020, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, 42% of the American population is now non-white, and non-whites will would be a majority of Americans by the year 2040, which is less than 2 decades away. And I think this change, rather than encouraging Americans about the great pluralistic country we should be, just scares the hell out of a lot of them. And I fear that as the population of the United States becomes less white, and certainly when it becomes majority non-white, we're in for some scary times. Do you want to disabuse me of that theory?
Oh, no. And I think the scarier piece is our population growth is down. We're one of the countries that the United Nations has identified as below what we should be in population, which means we need more people. That's just a side comment. But the people who are clinging onto this were older, and they're getting older. But now what we see in these shootings, Buffalo's a great example, are young people embracing these crazy ideas and being radicalized, like Steve Miller was radicalized in high school. And the whole arc of his life has been informed by that fear mongering and hate mongering. And the difference, I guess, between the Buffalo shooter and Steve Miller is that Steve Miller got in a position of power and the Buffalo shooter hid out in his room hiding from his parents. Otherwise, it's the same thing, weaponized differently. It's very frightening, and it capitalizes on fear. I mean, it's a fear-based set of ideas. And I don't want to call it theory. I don't like this replacement theory because it heightens it as if it were a school of thought. It's not a school of thought. It's just pure and simple fear-mongering, hate-mongering, racism. Period. Been there my whole life. Been there since the founding of America.
Yeah, it really is, and its currency is very troubling. And again, I find it very troubling that it seemed to have become gospel among Republican presidential candidates. Republican presidential, congressional, and state candidates. And J.D. Vance, the campaign ad we played for J.B. Vance, is a good example of that. What do you think the future holds? Are we in a well, actually, I'm going to stop now because we're coming to a break. But when we come back, we'll have more Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Frye, who is the co-founder and executive director of Project Lifeline. And by the way, I said the Project Lifeline website It's projectlifeline.us. So if you want more information about Project Lifeline and the great work that it does for immigrants, please take a look at it. And I also want to say that the other reason this whole situation bothers me is this country, my great grandparents were immigrants to this country, and immigration in this country has made this country great. And what bothers me is that since a lot of the immigration is coming from Central America and Asia instead of Europe, that injects the racism into it. And I think it's, as Hope said, we need population growth, and it's young immigrants that are going to make this country great in the future. So we'll be right back after these messages.
I want to get back to seeing my grandbabies every Sunday and smothering them with big hugs and kisses.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. We're taking a break for our radio listeners, but we still have our viewers. And if you want to, our guest in this half hour is Hope Frye, co-founder and executive director of Project Lifeline, and the Project Lifeline website is projectlifeline.us. Hope, let's talk about something else that's been in the news lately. It's called Title 42. What is Title 42 and why is it causing so much controversy?
When COVID started, rather than have an informed reaction as Fauci wanted to have us mask and have us do other things, the administration focused on the southern border and said, we can't let anybody in because the people who are coming in will bring COVID and they will increase our risk for COVID. So they invoked a little used and little known provision of the law. Title 42 is where you find it, that says you can keep people out if there's an epidemic. And it was never.
Okay. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Frye, who is the co-founder and executive director of Project Lifeline. We're going to, I think we're having some technical problem with Hope. Okay. Hope, you still there?
Can you hear me?
Okay. Hope, why don't you explain to our audience, actually, I'm going to ask you another question because we're going to go to a break pretty quickly. When we had you on the show originally, we were talking about the situation of immigrant children on the border, and then they were being kept in cages like prisoners. What is the situation with children at the border now?
Interesting you should ask, because on Friday, the lawsuit that was filed as a result of those Customs and Border Protection visits in June of 2019 was settled. The settlement has been given to the judge on Friday. It's really long. Basically, kids are still kept in cages. They're kept there right now for a shorter time. There are some improvements, but basically we're looking at more or less the same system that we had when we broke the news in 2019. And we saw again when we had an influx of children last year, the same, and COVID, they were being packed in, again into cages, packed into buses. And I'm going to tell the story when we get to talking about Title 42 of an 8-year-old girl.
Okay, well, why don't you hold that, Hope, because we're going to take a break so we can bring back our radio listeners. So we'll be right back with more Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Welcome back to Deadline. Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Hope Frye, the co-founder and executive director of Project Lifeline. We're going to talk immigration and Title 42 in this segment. By the way, if you're a radio listener and you would like to view Deadline DC, you can do it on twitter.com/Brad Bannon, or tinyurl.com/BB Facebook Live, or tinyurl.com/Brad on YouTube. Hope, why don't you explain to our viewers and listeners what Title 42 is and why it is causing so much controversy?
Title 42 is, again, a Trump-era initiative, a policy that precludes anybody from coming in, any foreign national without documentation, from coming in across the southern border because they're going to spread COVID. That's basically, it's the invocation of a little used law. And it was very clever. It was put in place at the beginning of COVID when everybody was very frightened. The science behind it is none. Epidemiologists, all infectious disease doctors, Fauci from the very beginning said it's not going to spread COVID. The incidence of COVID transmission among immigrants who were being admitted was less than that among Texans at the time that Title 42 was put in place. So nobody can come in across the southern border.
Okay.
Asylum seekers.
Okay. Now, when Joe Biden became president, Title 42 continued to be in effect. Then fairly recently, I believe the Biden administration eliminated the Title 42 requirement. But last week, I guess, a federal court in Louisiana said that the Biden administration did not have the power to eliminate Title 42. So where are we now?
The Biden administration in February came out with a formal announcement from CDC that Title 42 wasn't needed anymore, and said the program would end on today, I think, May the 23rd. And they published a 100-page document detailing how it would end, what the procedures were, and all the strategies for ending it. 3 states, I think it was Arizona, Missouri, and Louisiana, sued and said, number one, you haven't gone through rulemaking, which is a process for transparency. Trump didn't go through rulemaking when he put it into place. And they said, and secondly, it's going to have a terrible impact on us. Arizona, some sheriffs testified that it increased crime. Missouri looked at school kids, the cost of healthcare and driver's license, and the increase of trafficking. Louisiana looked at drugs. They were joined by 22 other states that all claimed individual harm because of the influx of asylum seekers if the border was open. That's basically where we are. So the court said you can't do it. You can't end Title 42, which is, oddly enough, Brad, in my opinion, a win for the Biden administration, because there was legislation recently introduced bipartisan to make it so he couldn't end Title 42. So now he's trying to end it so he's satisfying advocates on one side, and he can't do it. So it's not his fault that it isn't done. So he actually got a win there. I don't think Republicans realized that, or not really Republicans.
No, I'm sure they didn't. And even if they did, I'm sure they weren't going to say much about it. Well, the Title 42 is just a manifestation of a larger issue. We've got this situation at the border, and we've been talking about, you've been on the shows over the last couple of years to talk about the situation. And the situation, unfortunately, doesn't seem to change very much. We've got all this controversy. What do we need? What do we need out of Washington to change the situation and to deal with this crisis? I mean, you said we still have kids in cages. We've got horribly racist attacks on the immigrants. And again, I'll say this, immigration is the key to the future of America for a number of different reasons. And it always has been part of the American experience. And we bring great people, unlike former President Trump said, we bring great people who have a lot of contributions to make to America through immigration. But we have this constant controversy that doesn't go away. What do we need to do to deal with this situation? It seems to me it's just one of those situations like climate change, social injustice in general that we talk about all the time. And, it just keeps going on, and there's never any solution to it. What do we need to do, Hope?
Well, first of all, we need to stop viewing it as a crisis. It's not a crisis. It's an issue of how we live with our neighbors. How do we meaningfully interact with those countries to the south of us that have civil instability, no civil order, that have economic despair, that are being ravaged by climate change? We need to look holistically at the situation. And then we need to say, this isn't a crisis. We have laws. We have international obligations. So let's figure out how we're going to implement those. Number one, we need money. You need to stop complaining. The Republicans need to stop complaining about the backlogs in court, immigration court, and fund it. Fund it properly, allow enough judges, allow enough courts to hear the claims by asylum seekers and determine whether they're legitimate or not. I mean, these people want a chance under the law to be heard. If they can't make their claims, then they don't make their claims and they'll be returned home. The second thing we need to do, and we need to do this for everybody, but we especially need to do this for children, we need to provide federal access to legal counsel. You are 90% more likely to win in your asylum claim in court if you have a lawyer than if you don't have a lawyer. That's shocking statistics. Lawyers, there's the Office of Refugee Resettlement that handles immigrant children doesn't want any lawyers involved because lawyers bring transparency. So we need transparency, and we need to look at our existing system of laws, and we need to fund things, and we need to stop acting out of fear and start realizing that immigration is necessary for the resilience of our society, the maintenance of our economic prowess. We need to look at it, we need to flip it from replacement theory and see how it vests and drives forward our best interest domestically and internationally.
Okay. Hope, thanks very much for joining us. I'm sure we'll talk with you again about the immigration situation. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon after this short break. Our guest in the next half hour is Bob Keefe, who's the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs. He's here to talk about his new book, which is Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Planet. And again, thank you very much to Hope Frye, who is the co-founder and executive director of Project Lifeline, who devotes her life to helping immigrants. And I certainly hope we take Hope's recommendations into consideration, because this is a situation that cannot continue.
Hey, Dad, how do airplanes fly? Hey, Dad, what's in this box?
Thanks, Brad.
Can I touch this? Where does sand come from? Is this tree good for climbing? What happens if I mix these two things together? How are babies made? What does this thing do?
Kids are curious about everything, including guns. Talking to them about gun safety in your home is a good first step, but you can do more. Always keep your guns locked, unloaded, and stored separately from ammunition. Storing your guns securely is the best way to prevent family fire, including unintentional shootings. For more information on safe gun storage and ways to keep your family safe, visit endfamilyfire.org. That's endfamilyfire.org.
What do we keep in the attic? What's this thing called? Can I ride my bike backwards?
Like I said, kids are curious. It's up to us to keep them safe. Brought to you by End Family Fire, Brady, and the Ad Council.
Right now, our country feels divided, but there's a place where people are coming together.
I gotta tell you, I was nervous to talk to someone so different than me.
Me too, but I'm glad we are.
Love Has No Labels and One Small Step are helping people with different political views, beliefs, and life experiences come together through conversation, and it feels good.
Wow, your story is so...
Interesting?
Yeah.
When people actually sit down, talk, and listen to one another, they can break down boundaries and connect as human beings. At lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep, you can listen to amazing, life-changing conversations and find simple tools to start a conversation of your own.
I know one thing. This conversation gives me hope.
It gives me a lot of hope, too.
Take a step toward bringing our country and your community together by having the courage to start a conversation at lovehasnolabels.com/onesmallstep. A message from StoryCorps, Love Has No Labels, and the...
I never dreamed of growing up to be a political activist commentator, but here I am, and it worked out pretty well for me. I've been lucky enough to have a voice in public matters and eke out a modest living running my mouth as an independent populist agitator. Still, I have to confess to the sin of job envy, not in the sense of being resentful, but regretful about my own inability to lift the trade of journalistic commentary to the heights attained by a small, feisty collection of unique public opinionators, political cartoonists. In framing issues and rallying people to think and act, these journalists have an unfair advantage over us mere word crafters. They can literally draw a picture to make their point. They reach masses viscerally as well as cerebrally, and visceral usually outpunches cerebral. Editorial cartooning is a profession made up largely of progressive mavericks who enter the social, political, cultural fray with an abundance of anti-establishment audacity, an eye for irony, fondness for the underdog, and an ability to laugh at absurdity, plus artistic talent. Because cartooning is an expression of the human spirit that's been irrepressible since cave drawings, generation after generation of pen and ink champions of democracy blossomed. The general public's appreciation and demand for the cartoonist's unblinking honesty and satire have never flagged, even increasing whenever the artists come under public assault by autocrats, plutocrats, screwballs, and assorted other censors. These graphic editorial artists matter. Again and again, they've roused the public to rise up and put down corporate and political scoundrels, incrementally advancing our nation's democratic possibilities. As in the natural world, though, even the most beneficial creatures can be driven to extinction. This is Jim Hightower saying, check your own local newspaper. Are your favorite cartoonists still there?
Of climate change. But before we do, we have this short clip. Climate change is killing our economy from environmental entrepreneurs.
Climate change is killing our economy. Last year alone, climate-related disasters sucked $145 billion out of our economy. We can't afford to delay action any longer. Learn more at e2.org.
Welcome back to Deadline DC. This half hour of Deadline DC with Brad Bannon is brought to you by my company, Bannon Communications Research, which polls for progressive issue groups, labor unions, and Democrats. Our guest in this half hour is Bob Keefe. He is the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs, E2, a national nonpartisan group of business leaders, investors, and professionals from every sector of the economy who advocate for smart policies that are good for the economy and good for the environment. Bob is here to talk about his new book, Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Battle to Save Our Planet. Bob's Twitter handle is BKEEFEE2. That's BKEEFEE2, and the handle for environmental entrepreneurs is Twitter handle is E2org, E2RG. The website is www.e2.org. Bob, welcome to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Glad to have you on the show.
Brad, it's so great to be with you. Thanks for that, and thanks for that great introduction.
It's a pleasure to have you on the show. Well, let's start off. Tell us about your book. Why did you write your book?
Well, Brad, before I joined E2, I spent 20 plus years as a journalist. And to me, there was a story out there that wasn't being told. And it's the story of the economic cost of climate change and the economic benefits of climate action. So all of us who have been alive for the past 10 or 20 years have realized that climate change is no longer just an environmental issue. It's no longer just a social issue. Climate change has become an economic issue, Brad. I mean, as we mentioned in the clip, last year we had almost $150 billion worth of damages from climate-related disasters. That's up 50% or so from the previous year, almost 50% from the previous year. That's according to NOAA, by the way. In the past 5 years alone, we've had 3 of the most expensive wildfires in our nation's history, 5 of the most costly hurricanes, the worst, most expensive freeze in Texas, and the worst, most expensive thunderstorm in Iowa and surrounding states in the past. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. What about insurance rates that have been going up for every homeowner in America? What about the cost to the military for rebuilding bases in places like Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, or Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida, or Offutt in Nebraska that got hammered to the tune of $9 billion worth of damage from storms just a couple years ago? Food costs are going up. When farmers suffer from droughts and flooding in the Midwest, we suffer at the grocery line. And we all know that the cost of everything from cornflakes to chicken is going up, in part because those crops are dying and those animals are dying. So it's an expensive and growing problem for our economy, and we've got to do something about it.
Well, that brings us to the next question. Can we do anything about it? Joe Biden proposed an ambitious program that would devote billions of new dollars to fighting climate change in his Build Back Better program. Yeah. But it seems to be stuck in the Congress, in the Senate, particularly with little progress. So I guess my question to you, have we made any progress in fighting climate change? And secondly, do you think Joe Biden will be able to enact his climate fighting agenda?
Absolutely. Well, look, there's 2 sides to the climatenomics coin, I like to say, Brad. It's the economic cost of climate change, but then there's the economic benefits of climate action. And we know this works now, right? We have seen in the past 10, 15 years, solar and wind become the cheapest power available in the country. Look at electric vehicles. I don't know about you, but when I was watching the Super Bowl this year, I noticed that of the 12 or 13 car ads, all but one of them were for electric vehicles. Every single manufacturer of vehicles, domestically and foreign, are shifting to electrics. Why? In part because consumers and folks like me and you are tired of paying $6 a gallon of gasoline. Sure. And watching it continually go up. It's not going to come down very much, guys. I got news for you. You and I are old enough, Brad, to remember $1 a gallon gasoline probably. We're not going back to those days. But the good news is the technology has caught up with things. When Jimmy Carter put solar panels on the White House, they weren't ready for prime time. We all know that now. But as I mentioned, solar and wind is now the cheapest power available. Electric vehicles are here. Energy efficiency, whether it's LED lighting or Energy Star appliances or Nest thermostats or just plain old better windows and doors, are saving consumers money with every power bill. But we've got to get this stuff available and more affordable to everyday Americans. And that's what the legislation that you mentioned, what's left of the Build Back Better bill in Congress, that will do that through tax credits, et cetera. We need to get it done.
Well, the question is, what can we do to get it done? I mean, does it require a sea change in public opinion that ends in pressure on the Senate? What do we need to do? I mean, it seems to me that it's an urgent crisis. And, you know, I just don't know if people in Washington take it seriously. Certainly, there are probably 48 votes in the Senate for President Biden's climate change package. He needs at least 50. And it just seems to be stalled, and it's incredibly frustrating to a lot of people. You know, what's it going to take to move this country forward?
Well, one of the reasons I wrote the book, Brad, and you asked about that, and it's to raise awareness again of the economic cost of things. And look, I don't care if you love polar bears or you believe in science. I don't care if you drive a pickup or a Prius. The fact of the matter is our economy is suffering because of climate change. $150 billion last year. That's more money, by the way, than the gross state product of about 17 different states. It's more money than Microsoft makes. It's more money than General Motors makes. And you can bet that if our country was facing $150 billion worth of economic damage from anything else, we'd be moving, we'd be doing something. Lawmakers would be paying attention. So I think that we all need to make sure our lawmakers understand that these costs that every single taxpayer is bearing are getting to be too much, especially in this economy. We need to do something to blunt those costs. The good news is we can do it by expanding jobs, creating more clean energy, and making it cheaper for all of us to do that. So I think it's the sooner that lawmakers realize that this is something that's not just hitting the Arctic or the Antarctic or some faraway Pacific island, but it's hitting Iowa and Kentucky and North Carolina and Texas and every other state. It'll hopefully prompt them to act.
Okay. Now, what I see in the national polls is that large numbers of Americans believe there is a severe threat from climate change.
Right.
And I think it mainly, concerns about, global warming,
right,
and resulting natural disasters. I mean, every summer I've watched the, national news every night, as painful as it is. And there's almost always a story these days about a forest fire in Arizona, or in the Pacific Northwest or in California. Do you think Americans are any closer, not only towards recognizing the problems, but wanting to do something about it?
Well, look, last year alone, 1 out of 4 Americans lived in a place that got hit by a major climate disaster. And when I started writing Climatenomics a year plus ago, Brad, look, the West was on fire. We had so many hurricanes, we ran out of names for them, and the Midwest was dealing with floods and droughts. Guess what? The West is on fire again. Hurricane season starts next week, guys. And
already had tornadoes in the Midwest.
And we've already had tornadoes in the Midwest.
We got to take a break here, Bob. So we're going to let our radio listeners go for a couple minutes, but we're going to keep the show going for our viewers on Facebook and YouTube and Twitter. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC after these messages.
What I know about courage, I learned from my adoptive mom. She said sometimes you just gotta hold on.
Welcome back to Deadline DC with Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Bob Keefe, who is the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs. More specifically, Bob is here to talk about his great new book, Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Planet. Bob, let me ask you this. Just before we went to break, we talked about the natural disasters, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the forest fires that are blighting our nation. Do you think people recognize at this point recognize the connection between these natural disasters and climate change, or do we still have a ways to go to educate Americans?
Well, I think Americans are getting educated on their own, unfortunately, and they're getting educated on their own because these are disasters that are hitting every single part of the country now. It's no longer just fires in the west or hurricanes in the east. 2 years ago, we had the worst thunderstorm or derecho in Iowa that the state and that region has ever seen. It caused something like $7 billion worth of damage to corn and every other crop in the state of Iowa and Indiana, I believe. Look at what happened over the holidays, Brad, in Denver, suburban Denver, Colorado. We had a wildfire that wiped out 1,000 houses right around Christmas time, including the house, by the way, of one of my colleagues who lived through this. Look at what happened just a week or two before that in the Midwest when we had an unprecedented swarm of tornadoes that ripped apart that Amazon warehouse, you may remember, in southern Illinois, and ripped a path all the way through the Midwest. So this is happening everywhere now. And the United States is, by the way, bearing a bigger for this now than other countries. Globally, the United States had 6 of the 10 most expensive disasters 2 years ago. That's not going to get any better unless we do something about it.
No, I'm afraid not. Let me ask you this question, Bob. And I've been working in Washington State for the last couple of years, right, for a group of environmental groups who are helping pass Governor Inslee's environmental agenda. And there's been successful. Washington State has made some remarkable strides in fighting climate change. What is the difference between people in the West seem to be much more climate conscious than people, certainly in the South or even the Midwest. What's the difference, do you think?
Well, I don't exactly know, Brad. I mean, look, I grew up in North Carolina. I lived in Texas. I lived here in D.C. for 6 years, and now I live in California myself. I can tell you that you only have to drive around the state of California and look at places like Lake Shasta, where I was not too long ago, and see not just the bathtub ring, but it's gone. That lake is nearly gone. Look at Lake Mead and other lakes where they have to.
I'm going to have to interrupt here. We're going to take another short break to bring our radio listeners. We'll be back with more of Deadline DC in a short moment. Welcome back to Deadline. Brad Bannon. Our guest in this half hour is Bob Keefe, who's the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs. Bob's here today to talk about his great new book, Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Planet. Bob, let me ask you this. We've talked about the economic cost of climate change, the droughts, the fires, the tornadoes, hurricanes, and the financial damage they cost our nation. Let's talk more about the benefits. For instance, what economic benefits would accrue to us if, for example, the Senate got off its butt and passed Joe Biden's Build Back Better program, especially the part with the the provisions to fight climate change?
Yeah, I love talking about the good stuff. So thank you.
Let's talk about the good stuff.
Let's talk about the good stuff. It makes us feel better too, doesn't it?
It makes me feel better too.
Well, look, for starters, it would make through tax credit extensions, et cetera, would make solar and wind and batteries more cheaper and more available to more Americans. And that's important, Brad, because as mentioned before, solar and wind is already the cheapest power available. It's ask any utility. They're not going back to coal. They don't want to use natural gas, especially with natural gas prices sky high and growing. Solar and wind is the cheapest power available. We need to get that more to more people, and tax credits through that bill would do that. It would also include rebates for electric vehicles. So no, we all can't drive Teslas, or I can't afford a Tesla anyway. But
very few people can.
That's exactly right. But with more charging stations out there, with more rebates, more people can afford the growing number of electric vehicles that are out there. It's funny, I was just out with a friend of mine yesterday, and we drove basically from Manassas to the mountains in his Mini Cooper, electric Mini Cooper, 120 miles. We didn't stop for a single gallon of gasoline in that thing. And when gas is at $6 a gallon, it's mighty nice not to be able to do that in some places of the country. So it would make electric vehicles cheaper for people. It would expand energy efficiency, which will reduce our monthly energy bills. And who doesn't want that? And importantly, Brad, it'll invest in clean energy research and development to keep America competitive with other countries overseas.
One thing I'd like you to talk about is they're advocates of clean energy talk about the fighting clean energy would lead to an economic revival for the United States, technology, new jobs. Talk about that aspect of the economic benefits.
Absolutely. Well, look, what we know is what we know. And what we know is after the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act of 2009 was the biggest investment in clean energy, Brad, in this country's history at that point, something like $90 billion total. And what did we get out of that? We got upwards of 3 million clean energy jobs now in America. I know this because my organization, E2, has been tracking clean energy jobs around the country for about a decade now. And those are jobs that pay about 25% better than the national median salary. And 3 million jobs, that's more people than there are, frankly, bankers or real estate brokers. And by the way, twice as many people that work in fossil fuels. Yes, they're solar and wind installers, but they're also, the biggest number of those are energy efficiency workers who are making our homes, our offices, our schools more energy efficient and saving us money with every electric bill. So that was a $90 billion investment back in 2009. What we're talking about now with the budget reconciliation bill that we've been talking about would be something on the order of $550 billion over the course of 10 years, which is, $55 billion a year is a hell of a lot of money. But when we're getting $150 billion worth of damage from climate right now, it seems like a bargain, especially if we can create a lot more of those jobs, drive economic growth in doing that.
Okay. Our guest in this half hour is Bob Keefe, who is the Executive Director of Environmental Entrepreneurs. He's here to talk about his great new book, Climatenomics, Washington Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Nation. Let me ask you this, Bob. Our country is so wedded to fossil fuels. Do you see hope that we can meet clean energy goals in the next 10 years, or are you not optimistic?
Brad, I get that question a lot. And what I like to say is, as I mentioned to you before I started running E2, I was a journalist for about 20 years. And in that time, I covered Silicon Valley and technology for a lot of years. And I can distinctly remember sitting in a meeting with Steve Jobs telling me that someday I'm going to have 1,000 songs in my pocket, and somehow trying to convince me that I'm going to be taking pictures with my cell phone. And I and everybody else were thinking, oh, yeah, whatever. I remember Jeff Bezos saying, you're going to be able to order anything on my website, not just books anymore, Bob, anything. And I remember the Google guys telling me that you're going to be able to find anything on the internet humanly possible. We all thought that stuff was a bunch of hokum. We never thought that could happen. But look how quickly technology has transformed our lives, Brad. Look how quickly that's happened. There's no reason we can't do the same thing with clean energy. We're already there. We're seeing it every day with electric vehicles right now. We're seeing it with the continued cost declines in solar panels and wind turbines. There's no reason we can't make this happen nationwide, except except we need the will of our politicians here in Washington to pass the policies to make this happen.
And is it will they, can they resist the big money that fossil fuels industry invest in lobbying in Washington and campaign contributions to see the light?
Well, here's one thing that gives me hope, Brad, is that when you look around at where these clean energy jobs are being created, and as I mentioned, E2 has been doing that for about 10 years. But if you look at where these jobs are being created, of the 3 million people that work in clean energy, about half of them, nearly half of them, work in Republican congressional districts. So Republican congressional districts have almost as many jobs as they are in clean energy as Democratic districts. And then if you look at where all these electric vehicle companies are going now, Brad, they're building factories. Ford's building the F-150 Lightning truck in Tennessee, Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, Texas. These are all red states where these great jobs that are coming online now, creating or building electric vehicles, are going. There's only so much longer that politicians from those states can say this EV stuff is for greenies from California or clean energy is just for crazy liberals on the coast, because it's impacting their economies on the positive side, and it's impacting their economies on the negative side with the cost of these disasters.
Okay. Go ahead. Oh, okay. Let me ask you about something else. We got about a minute and a half left. In your book, you talk a lot about, corporate America, moving to see the light. Is that real? Is corporate America really concerned about this problem, or are they still dragging their feet?
The corporate America has seen the light, Brad. I can tell you that. And they've seen it not out of the goodness of their hearts or their care for the environment necessarily, although that is a factor. They care about it because, as mentioned, and Climatenomics dwells on, climate change is now an economic issue. Amazon, Apple, Facebook, all of these companies are shifting to 100% clean energy. It's the right thing to do. The other reason they're doing it is because it's the cheapest thing to do. That's the cheapest energy they can get to run these mega data centers, et cetera. And these other companies are dealing with natural disasters, whether it's flooding in the Midwest or hurricanes in the East or fires in the West, that are starting to hit their bottom line significantly, and they've got to do something about it.
Okay, Bob, I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Our guest in this half hour has been Bob Keefe, who is the Executive Director of E2 Environmental Entrepreneurs. He is also the author of a great new book called Climatenomics, Washington, Wall Street, and the Economic Battle to Save Our Planet. I want to thank Bob, and I also want to thank our first guest, Hope Frye from Project Lifeline, and of course, our executive producer, Mark Grimaldi. Be safe and be strong in these troubled and turbulent times, and watch and listen to Deadline DC live every Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time, or the podcast anytime at twitter.com/Brad Bannon or facebook.com/Deadline DC with Brad Bannon /videos. And make sure you watch and listen to Leslie Marshall tomorrow, and we will join you again with another episode of Deadline DC with